Hi, I'm Sarit with Sustainability Buzz, and thank you so much for joining us for episode 3 of Father's Influence. Today's Father's Day edition features a very special guest, Dr. Nelson Bulmash. Dr. Bulmash is a published writer and speaker currently residing in Alpharetta, Georgia, where he is the founder and CEO of Health Matters, an award-winning TV and podcast show that focuses on the very best in health, inspiration, and spirituality. Health Matters may be found on 10 different TV platforms like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and others. Dr. Bulmash's show has been on several FM and AM radio stations and is carried on all major social media platforms. Dr. Bulmash has spent over 25 years building a clinical practice specializing in chiropractic and clinical nutrition. Dr. Bulmash has established himself as an expert in health and fitness, with an emphasis on strength coaching. He has coached several American team powerlifters at the national and international levels, helping them to win gold, silver, and bronze medals, often setting new American and world records. He has provided chiropractic and nutritional care for athletes in the NFL, NBA, MLB, tennis, golf, martial arts, rugby, soccer, rowing, gymnastics, equestrian, cheerleading, volleyball, track and field, and powerlifting communities. Wow. You have done so much. I'm so excited to have you join me today. I can't wait to hear more about you as a father, and just your entire moral compass. So thank you for joining us.
Sari, thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure. It's always so great when you and I get together. We think along similar veins, and we always have a lot of fun, as we will today. And I have to tell you, you invited me to speak about one of my favorite subjects. I had an extraordinary father. I was very blessed uh, in doing so, and it made a very significant difference for me, not only as a man, but certainly as a father as well. And I can't wait to talk more about that today.
Me too. I can't wait to hear all about it. So maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about your father. He's met some incredible people. He's done some incredible things, and I'd love for everyone to learn more about him.
My father was a very humble Jewish man. He was second generation here in the United States. His father, Meyer, came over before the Holocaust. And my father had an interesting life. He had an amazing father, but his father died when he was very young. And one of the things that set the stage for my dad that made his life so difficult was that by the time he was 21 years of age, his sister had died. His father died at 37. The woman he was going to marry died before she was 21. And his mother got very, very depressed. My grandparents were in an arranged marriage, Sarit, and she did not want to marry him. She was a very stubborn woman and a very angry woman. She was not the kind of woman you ever crossed. She was that kind of person who, if you crossed her, she wrote you off forever. And she didn't want to be told who to marry. And she was very angry about it. And, it's quite interesting because my grandfather was said to be the crown jewel of our leg of the family. And eventually she fell deeply in love with him. And my father happened to be one of the only people she would actually listen to, that she really respected. He was a very, very intelligent man, and he had a way of saying things that made it really difficult to debate or to argue with him. And so she said, Jerry, your father, my husband, was one of the greatest men that I ever met. And it's strange because I didn't want to marry him. And eventually I realized he was an extraordinary man. And she said, sadly, he died so young. She said, I will never find another man like him. And she said, I will live. Sorry, this is very emotional. Yeah. She said, I will live to see you turn 21. And she did. And then she died.
Wow.
So she was, the only one left in his family was his brother when he turned 21. And he was he was an extraordinary man, as I mentioned. He went to World War II. His mother was very, very upset because she didn't want him to die. And so he went to Japan and he became a military policeman. He was highly intelligent and he was highly athletic. He won every competition with pull-ups, push-ups, dips. the 100-yard dash, the mile run, and wrestling. He was just, and just one of those people that was an outlier. I mean, in every way you could imagine. And he caught on to languages very, very quickly. So when he got to Japan, in a matter of weeks, he was speaking fluent Japanese. He had that kind of mind. He had a memory that was unbelievable.
Wow.
He had an understanding for language like nobody I had ever seen. Sweet. And I want to talk more about that in just a second because it's incredible. So he got over there and he really began to shine in all the tests he did. He was you want to talk about somebody with a moral compass. In 45 years that I had him as my father, he never lied one time. He was extremely honest. And I said to him, Dad, I've never known anybody like you. Like, I've never caught you. Not that I was trying to catch you in a lie, but you've never lied. Like, what's that all about? He said, I'm not wired to lie, son. It's not in my wiring. I live to tell my truth and to be my truth. And I am not a person who lies. I never have lied. Sometimes it's hard to face the truth. Sometimes I make mistakes, but you can trust me when I say something because I don't lie. You are correct. So he got over to Japan and he ended up meeting a guy by the name of MacArthur. And you're right, as in General MacArthur. And General MacArthur really liked my father. So he said, Jerry, you're amazing. You're one of the smartest young people I know. He got into the military, Sarit, I think when he was 17 years of age. He wasn't even old enough to go. But his mom, he said to my mom, he said, look, I know I got kicked out of high school. I don't like high school. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to go to the military. I'm going to get myself sorted out and I'm going to come back and I'm going to become educated. And I'm going to use the GI Bill of Rights to get educated, to pay for my education, because his mother wasn't working. She wasn't making any money. He was supporting the family, he and his brother, I should say. And so he sent his money back to his mom so that she could be supported. And he had adventures in Japan that were unbelievable. He ended up being so respected by MacArthur that MacArthur called him in one day and he said, Jerry, I've got a very, very special task for you. And he said, when I mean very special, I mean, this has got to be done like you're serving the president of the United States. It's got to be done with that kind of impeccability, that kind of integrity, and that kind of honor. And he said, sir, who here, other than the Emperor of Japan, would be even close to me working with the president of the United States? He said, I'm glad you said that, because the person you're going to be serving in the mind of the Japanese people is far greater than the president is to us. And I said, sir, the only person that could be is the Emperor of Japan. And he said, that's exactly right. He said, in the agreements, post-World War II agreements, we are going to be occupying Japan. And the Emperor of Japan must be accompanied by American soldiers when he travels anywhere. That's part of our agreement. I am going to pick you often to be the man that shuttles him through Japan. And he said, sir, you have, he was, I mean, when I tell you incredible, Sarit, he was, and it's so interesting because he was such an incredibly humble warrior. He was a scholarly warrior. And so he was in Japan for these number of years. And it's funny because he actually got to know Hirohito like on a personal level. Hirohito was so impressed by him. He said to him one day, Jerry, how is it that you treat me like you treat me? How do you do that? And he said, I don't understand your question. And he said, you treat me like you would treat your own General MacArthur or perhaps your president. And he said, sir, I am a soldier. I am bound by my honor, my word, and my integrity. We are no longer at war with each other. My commitment is no longer to fight you. And therefore, as such, I don't have a commitment to fight or to hate you. As such, I'm going to learn to respect you, to honor you, and to find ways that our cultures can come together in a spirit of opportunity. And he said, you are the most amazing young man I have ever met.
What stories you must have heard growing up from your father. I'm spellbound.
Yeah, he was really, when I tell you, extraordinary. I mean, he was ahead of our bloodline, if you will, and he was really, really incredible. The stories that he tells about being with MacArthur, the stories that he tells, MacArthur would send him out sometimes. And Sri, you have to understand that when the World War II was over, the Japanese were an incredible group of people. They were fierce beyond imagining. They had been going toe to toe with the Chinese for probably hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they were a fierce, fierce group of people. You did not want to fight them. My dad said that they were tenacious beyond imagining. And so sometimes he'd be sent out to get Japanese soldiers that were still trying to kill American soldiers in Japan while the United States occupied Japan. So there were times where he was sent out where MacArthur said, Jerry, I'm sorry, you got to help with this. We got a group of Japanese soldiers that are shooting at our Americans, and you got to be part of the group to, as an MP, this is going to be a military police action. And some of the stories he told about going after these soldiers, like in downtown, in populated areas of Japan, they were having shooting fights, in the downtown areas. One little interesting story, Hirohito enjoyed my father so much, he used to always bring his favorite sake. And he would speak to my father in Japanese because my father spoke fluent Japanese. So he would hand him his favorite bottle. Like there was a particular company that made sake in Japan. And he said to my father in Japanese, this is my favorite sake. I want you to have it. There's also a famous judo martial arts facility in Japan. And my father may have been the first American to ever go to it. He was invited because the Japanese soldiers were so inspired by who my father was, because my father was one of the only people, if not the only military policeman who would go with the equivalent of the Japanese military policeman. So they always had to be paired together because most Americans didn't speak Japanese. And so my father always brought his soldier, his equivalent, into the restaurants because it was really, 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 really cold, Sarid, in the Japanese winters. They were brutally cold. And so this wonderful soldier said to my dad, you treat me like I was an American soldier. Why do you do that? And he said, as I told Hirohito, we're not at war. And I'm going to do everything I can to find peace between us as men. And so my father was invited to the most prestigious martial arts facility in all of Japan. And some of the people there had said they'd never even seen a Caucasian man. This was very, very isolated. It's where the highest level martial arts masters in Japan were. And my father was an incredible wrestler, but he wasn't a practitioner of judo. So if I may use the word hell, if that's okay, he was getting the hell beat out of him because he didn't have any understanding of judo. Right. And so one of the high-level masters came out and said, he is a guest. He is our honored guest. Do not ever laugh at him again. Everybody's laughing at him like it was a way to beat up the opposing side, the enemy. And so he was one, if not the first American to ever go to this place. And he said it changed his life. He said the intensity, the honor, the commitment, the focus, the tenacity, the ferocity of these warriors was just like nothing he'd ever seen before. And so when his occupation in Japan ended, MacArthur brought him into his office and he said, Jerry, where do you want to go in the military? I will put you anywhere. You are an extraordinary man and soldier. And he paused. What did your dad respond? He said, General MacArthur, sir, it has been my honor and privilege to serve you. However, I want to become a doctor. And MacArthur looked at him and said, of course you do. Of course you do. He said, Godspeed to you, Jerry Bulmash. Know that it has been my honor and my privilege to serve our country with you.
What a story. What history. It's just incredible.
So yeah, that was my dad.
I mean, I can't even begin to fathom the types of stories and lessons that he taught you. If you could somehow, give, whether it's through examples or a summary, talk about the influence that your dad had on and how that impacted the way you raised your children.
Great question, Sweet. I wasn't a good student when I started out. I was hard of hearing. I didn't see well. And I was really dyslexic. So it made learning crazy difficult for me. And yet what was really odd is my dad was a microbiologist and he was so brilliant. We went to Central America in the 1960s when they had a huge number of people dying, particularly children in primarily Central America. And we lived in the jungles of Costa Rica. And my dad was
Wow.
the first person in the world living in jungle conditions that figured out that a combination of an unidentified species of salmonella that had never been identified, in other words, I think it was gram positive when all other forms of salmonella, if I'm not mistaken, are gram negative. He discovered that. And so you had a combination of, as I recall, of Shigella, which is another very lethal, deadly pathogen, bacterial in origin, and this form of salmonella were killing countless, particularly children. And so my dad was the one that went down in the world and figured that out. And in doing so, he saved countless lives. And so there are probably tens of thousands or more people alive today that never would have been alive had he not done that work. And so it was quite interesting because when we went to Costa Rica, we got to meet John F. Kennedy. He came down there. And when Kennedy went down there, we were waiting along the processional line to see him. And he immediately recognized that we were Americans. And he came, he flagged us over, or my mom and dad over. They were carrying my brother and myself. And he said, listen, I'm having a party tomorrow night. I would love for you to meet me at the American Embassy and be my honored guests. And so my mom and dad got to meet John F. Kennedy and his wife. And when he visited, something very unusual happened. There was a volcano there that had not gone off, Sarit, in many, many, many years. It was called Irazu, and Irazu blew, and it blew big, really big. And the Costa Rican people said to President John F. Kennedy, this is very, very foreboding for you. This is an ominous sign. You should be very, very, very careful. This is foretelling of bad things to come for you. And
Wow.
so I think a year later, he was assassinated. So my father was a kind of man that he led by example, but he also led by story. He used to say to me, son, most people don't remember dates. They don't remember numbers, but they'll remember an amazing story. And he was the best storyteller I ever knew. He made sure, Sarit, that he told stories that allowed us to carry down the stories of our family lineage. And that was incredibly impactful for me. An interesting thing happened. He was really bullied a great deal as a child. He was fun for people to pick on. And the first person that could make him throw up by punching him would win the game.
This just makes me think about, because I know that you and your children are so committed to physical health and strength building and powerlifting. Is this something, your dad went through, or is this just
Yes.
something that,
Yeah. Yeah.
so when did you
Yeah.
start getting into the
I got
physical
into it when I
strength?
was 4. I was 4 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad realized that he was going to be bullied for the rest of his life. So he got into gymnastics and he got into wrestling and he got into weightlifting and he became a force of nature. We have a lot of strength through our line. We have, and I'll answer your question in one sec. My father had a cousin that translates to Milton in English, and his family came out of Russia, and they were two of the most powerful men to ever come out of Russia. My dad said he was so. He said, You think I'm strong? Your cousin Michal was terrifyingly powerful." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Here's what it means." He said, "People used to bet on him that he couldn't do things. I watched him carry the axle of a train for a mile on his shoulders." I said, "This is a joke, right?" He said, "Oh no, it is not a joke." I watched him get arrested for pulling a small tree out of the ground in Patterson Park. And the judge liked him so much. He thought he was such an amazing man that he said, "Michal, you're going to pay for the tree, and damn it, don't ever show up in my courtroom again or I will throw you in jail." And he said, "Okay, sir. Okay." My dad said he could take a Baltimore, Maryland phone book. And one of the tricks to tearing a phone book in half, Street, is you flatten it out so that the pages are thin in one end, and then you get a better ability to grip it and tear it. He was so powerful. Somebody would hand him the book, and he would not spread the binding. He would just literally go like this and rip it in half. That's the kind of power he had. My dad said he was at a beach one day and he accidentally ran into him. Like, he was like, "Michael, what are you doing here?" He said, "Yeah, I ended up having the day off. I thought I'd go to the beach. What are you doing here?" He said, "I didn't have to work today either, so I'm down with my friends." He said, "I want you to do me a favor." He said, "What do you want, Jerry?" And he said, I want you to show my friends how strong you are." And he said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, put me over your head. So my dad crossed his arms like this, Sarit, and he said, I want you to make yourself very, very rigid. And my cousin Michal grabbed him underneath his crossed arms like this, and he said he shot him over his head like he had no weight in his hand. Now, I don't know about you, Sarit, but my dad weighed about 165 or 70 pounds. And he said he shot him up like a rocket. He said there was no pause. He said he blinked and he went from being on the ground to over his head. And then my cousin Michal proceeded to talk to him while he was up there and hold him. So, and apparently his father was as strong or stronger than he was. Well, my dad was incredibly powerful as well. And I'm going to share some really, really interesting stories with you about that. But he only was beaten once in his life in wrestling. And the only reason he lost, Sarit, was he was entering a big competition. And his best friend, Johnny Perks, said to me, Jerry, I beg you, please, please go in the super heavyweight division. He said, you want me to wrestle with people that are 250, 300 pounds as a 150-pound man? He said, Jerry, my mom and dad are here to watch me. This is the only time they have ever come. It'll be the only time they ever come. Please let me win. So my dad said, okay, I got it. No problem. I've won plenty of tournaments. So he went up to the heaviest division, because back then they had lightweight, middleweight, and then heavyweight or super heavyweight. And so my dad lost his first and only match of his life by 1 point. And after the match, the guy came up to him and said, who in the world are you?
Wow.
He said, if we had 15 to 30 more seconds, I was done. You would have pinned me. He said, I have never met a man that has your speed, your skill, your tenacity, or your strength. He said, thank you. It was a great match. And so that's sort of the background information, my dad. When he got out of World War II, he ended up going back to school, and his grades were so bad because he got kicked out of school. Only one counselor would talk to him, and he said, you better do something, Bulmash, because if by the end of the semester your grades are as lousy as they were on your transcripts, you're out of here. Well, he did very, very well. He'd grown up a lot. And then he went on to get his master's degree, University of Kentucky, and he went to get his PhD at the University of Cincinnati. And my father was so big, Sarit, on exercise and in scholarly pursuits like your dad. And so when I was 4 years old, to answer your question, I was standing there mesmerized watching my dad lift weights and do push-ups and all kinds of freehand exercise. And I said, Daddy, that's amazing. And he said, well, I'm glad you like it. He said, I want to share a story with you, son. And he mentioned a colleague of his that was very well known for developing something in the world of microbiology that I'll tell you about in a moment. And he said, you know, so-and-so's son, Dr. So-and-so's son, is apparently really, really strong. And I said, well, what does that mean, Daddy? How strong is he? And he said, well, he's so strong that at 7 years old, he did 10 push-ups and 10 sit-ups. I said, Daddy, that's not that strong. He said, I don't know, son. I think it is. 7 years old? Who can do that? I said, I can do that. He said, son, come on now. That's a lot of push-ups to be done correctly and a lot of sit-ups. He said, Daddy, I know I can do it. Well, how would you know you can do it, son? Have you ever done it? No, I haven't, Dad, but I know I can. Oh, I'd have to see that to believe it, son. Forgive me, I'm not calling you a liar, but that's really impressive. I'd have to watch you do that, son. So you can watch me do it right now. And I got down, I did 10 push-ups, I did 10 sit-ups. He said, oh my God, you really can. That's great. And so I started doing a little bit of exercise with my dad. I fell in love with it, Sarit. Long before I even was doing it to prevent people from bullying me, I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with what it did to my spirit. I fell in love with how it changed my body. I fell in love with how strong it made me. I got very, very strong. I used to love to hang out at the railroad tracks. And one summer when I was out of 6th grade, I was 12 years old, Sarit, I went to the railroad tracks and I saw this unusual train car on the tracks. And I thought, what in the world is that? I've never seen anything like that. And my friend said, I don't know. It's like an alien train car. And I said, yeah, it really is. You know, we were 12-year-old little guys, not knowing what in the world we were looking at. All of a sudden, this guy fired up this machine. And what it was, Sarit, it was a machine that took away old broken down railroad ties and put in new ones.
Oh,
and
cool.
so it was very, very exciting to watch this thing. And so what the car before that had done, Sarit, is it had thrown out these containers, these kegs of railroad spikes, and they were 205 pounds each one. So I don't know if you can see me, but they were this big and, this big around. And so my friend said, "Oh my God, that's 205 pounds. That's more than we weigh." I said, "It is, and it's mine." And I reached down straight with my hands like this on the sides of it. And I picked it up and I pressed it over my head. And my guys, and I turned around with holding it over my head, and my buddies were jaw dropped and speechless. And they went, "Oh my God." They looked at each other like they'd seen an alien. They said, How did you do that?" I said, "I don't know, but it felt great." And then I threw it down, Sarit. And it was the first time in my life I'd lifted something up, 205 pounds. I was only I don't know, 130, 40, 50-pound kid. And that's the moment I realized I got this.
Mind over
And
matter.
yeah. And so one of the great things my father taught me was I had a really hot temper when I was young. I was Jewish. None of the Christian parents would let me date their girls. So I went through high school. I had one date and I thought, I must be the really weird guy. Nobody wants to date me. And then one of my Christian friends pulled me over and he said, "Nelson, you're not a weird guy. They're not going to let you date because you're Jewish, and nobody wants their kids here dating a Jewish boy. That's the bottom line." I said, "You've got to be kidding me." I said, "No, I'm not. I can tell you because I've been in circles where they talked about you. So they don't want to date me because I'm a Jewish boy, huh? Okay." So I only went on one date. A friend of mine who really loved me. As a matter of fact, she was one of my first, when I was younger, young women that I dated. And she lived far away. And she said, "Nelson, you got to go to the prom. You can't graduate from high school and not go to the prom. Please, please take me to my prom." And so I took her to her prom, and we had an amazing time, and we're friends to this very day. So, to answer your question, that aspect shaped my world because it made me a very powerful man. And when I was in college, I had many coaches and athletes say, "You're the number one ranked college athlete in the United States at your body weight." I said, "I didn't know that." And they said, "Yeah, you are." And then I had a tragic accident, Sarit, where I fell down a flight of stairs, was transiently paralyzed, broke my back in 4 to 6 places. And before I could become the national champion, I was having to learn how to walk again. And I still live with the tremendous pain of that injury. But as God would have it, I didn't get to win the championship. But as you know, I got to have 3 kids, all 3 extremely talented athletically. My youngest looked at me one day, literally after breaking an unofficial world record in the squat. Then Sophia turned around at 10 and she looked at me and we're all jaw dropped, Reese, Ariel, and myself. I said, "You just unofficially broke the world record for your age." And she said, "Daddy." I said, yeah, sweetheart, what?" She said, I'm just not feeling this heavy weight on my back. I don't really want to do this." And I took a deep gulp, and I saw Reese and Ariel kind of do one of these. And I said, "Well, sweetie, I only want you to do what's right for you." And I think one of the things that a lot of parents do, Sarit, that gets them off track with their kids is they try to force them to do things. I never did that with my kids. I realized I had a brother who was, and he'll probably get upset at me. I apologize in advance, Mark, but he was a child prodigy. He is the smartest person I've ever known. When my sister went to Princeton, she said, "I never met anybody as smart as our brother. Not the professors, not the students. He is just an outlier in his own land, his own world, and an amazing man. A really, truly, an honorable man, a wonderful man in his own right. Great father, great man, brilliant, and very, very humble for his intellect. My father taught me to really appreciate humility. He said, our relatives were spread throughout Europe when they were gathered up and killed. He said, "You never know how fast you can be in a concentration camp." He said, "Live with humility, live with honor, live with integrity, and treat people as you would have them treat you." And so my whole life, Sri, one of these days we'll get to meet in person and you'll hang out with me and you'll see I'm the guy that's, "Hey, how are you? How are you doing? Good to see you. Good to meet you." Because I really believe that in being a good person, the power to bring us together in these turbulent times, as my friend Isabel Hunt, who's just won 10 awards for her new featured documentary titled the power, and I'm going to have you interview her. I'm going to ask if she will, and I know you will, and I know you're going to fall in love with who she is as a person. Her film is titled The Power of Connection. And as she makes a very compelling case in her movie, Sarit, that what is necessary during these turbulent times where there's so much anger, there's so much hatred, there's so much confusion, depression, anxiety, is that we must come together in a spirit of connection where we
Amen.
honor our differences. We honor that we live different lives, but really, Sarit, when we sit down and talk, what do we want mostly that's so different? We want to be able to live free. We want to be able to live in a comfortable home. We want to feel like we're protected, like we're not going to be shot or abducted, harmed in any way when we leave our house. Same with our family. So most of our needs are the same. And she makes a very compelling case that it really is illusionary that we're separate. And to stop letting leaders, stop letting people insist that this rift has to exist, because it doesn't. And so how I live my life as a son, as a father, as a leader, is to always look for the power of connection. I did a lot of fighting, Sarit, when I was young. I lived in Flint, Michigan, when we had the highest unemployment, rape, assault, and murder rate per capita in the United States. I was the
Yeesh.
smallest bouncer in the big clubs that I worked at. And I fought. If it was a slow night, I got in 6 fights. It was a bad night, I got in over 20 fights. And what I mean by that is that I lived in Flint when the automobile industry was being destroyed. And Flint, Michigan is one of the areas where they have the highest recruitment rate for the military. We had, once upon a time, huge automobile manufacturing plants. And we had very, very educated people. The University of Michigan had one of its base campuses in Flint, Michigan. So it was a highly educated area, and it was an area that really, once again, supported the military very, very heavily. And we, had lots of manufacturing. So Flint, Michigan was once upon a time one of the jewels of this country. Massively educated people helping to really create this amazing city of manufacturing. And it died very quickly. And so what happened, Sarit, is unemployment rate, they claimed, went up to 42%. Well, most of the people in Flint argued that. We believed it was probably well over 50%. So as a small guy of 245 pounds, I ended up getting a job as a bouncer at some very, very big clubs, like one called the Micatam, which I never verified this. Today they verify everything through internet research. I can't prove this, but it was said that it was the second largest nightclub in the United States. We had thousands of people that would come in a night. And you get this strange combination of military personnel, shop workers, and educated, very often entitled, wealthy college kids. And they did not play nicely in the sandbox.
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
so, yeah. And so it was my job to make sure, Sarit, that peace would prevail. And sometimes you'd get a group of shop workers who'd fight a group of military guys, or a group of college kids who would fight military guys. And it was just really ugly. And so I developed many scars on my fists. If you ever see me and you look at my hands, even after 40 years, you will see the marks of teeth that were broken on my hands from the tremendous amount of fighting that I did. And I mean, tremendous. I mean, like I said, I'm not exaggerating. Some nights it could be 10 or 20 fights with men, because I'd go into the middle of gangs or groups of men fighting it. And me and, 3 other bouncers would have to get rid of everybody before they destroyed the place. So it was pretty brutal. And it made me very hungry for a couple of things, Sarit. One was that I really wanted peace. And you can make anything of this that you choose. It was like I had come into this life wired to be a fighter. I was very, very, very good with my hands and feet. And before it was over with, I did more fighting than I ever would care to tell you. And what it did to me is it made me realize the importance of connecting to people in a peaceful way so that we could live in a collaborative spirit of cooperation, not in violence. And so, as you know, I have spent the last 30 years of my life, in a matter of a couple months, it'll be or a few months, it'll be 30 years that I practiced as a chiropractor, naturopath, and a nutritionist with 2 diplomates in clinical nutrition and so forth, 7 subspecialties. So I've made my whole life about healing and about helping people from return from injury and from illness. And I love that. It feels much better than hurting people.
The evolution from where you started and where you are now is very powerful. And I'm sure that, some people just walk the peaceful path naturally, and some get there through the back door or the jungle,
Yeah.
so to
Yes.
say.
Yes.
And there's
Yes.
a lot to be said about the learning process and the journey to get to that place of peace. As a father, and you have 3 grown children now, and
Mhm.
when they were growing up, when I was growing up, technology, it was a part of our lives, but it wasn't the everyday, bulk of our existence. And so I grew up playing outside. My dad would just, we would drive in the car, he would pull over, we would go run through wildflower fields.
Beautiful.
You just, nature was so important in my upbringing. How did you navigate through the influx of technology to ensure that it didn't infiltrate like their daily existence, that you could still hold on to the values that, are so important when you're raising a family?
Great question. One is I never permitted my son as a child to get computer games. I remember how addicted I was to them at the
Yes.
arcades. And
Yes.
when I ran out of quarters, it was done. I didn't have any more money. I couldn't play anymore. But when you have a game on your iPad or on your computer, you can play hours and hours. And I have parents that tell me their kids play for 8 to 11 hours a day.
Oh,
And I look at them and I say, how in the world can you permit that? I said, who's responsible there? These are kids. They're your kids. Why are you letting them play for 8 to 11 hours? I have to tell you a little secret here. If you speak to my kids, and I'll give you an example. After my daughter Ariel got married, June 12th of last summer, she said to me at the wedding dinner, she said, Dad, I got to tell you, you were pretty tough. And I said, you think so? And it's funny to me because to me, I was nowhere near as tough as my father. You
right.
didn't mess up in my house. I'll tell you this, Sarit, I understood cause and effect. If I didn't take out the trash when my father told me, he would look at me and he would say, son, I don't repeat myself. You're grounded for a week. And I'd be grounded for a week. I'll tell you something. Do you know what I used to do? There was no TV, there was no radio. My father said, you can go up and exercise or you can read. You'll
Hmm.
come out to bathe, you'll come out to eat, you'll come out to do your chores. Otherwise, you will remain, young man, in your room. Now, parents today would think that's hideous. That's ridiculous. But I'll tell you something, Sarit. I am the most resilient man that I know in my age group. I will not fail for long because I have a tenacity. I have a fire in my spirit that is, God will take it out of me when I leave this world. Until then, it is mine and I own it and it drives me. I have a great marriage. I have kids who love me. I have friends who love me and adore me. I have been extremely successful in my career because I learned things like cause and effect. Now, was it hard? Was it maybe over the top? Maybe. I don't know, Sarit. I'm not a person who lives my life from a place of constantly being victimized like so many people I meet today live out of this spirit of I'm always being victimized by the world. And I got news for those people. If that's the way you want to win in life, you want to be a victim of everything, you can. The problem is it's not very fun to play that game and the rewards are not very good.
Right.
I developed relationships that I have friends that if I called them and asked them for pretty much anything that was legal and ethical, they'd give it to me. It's like, Nelson, you don't need to tell me anything. I know who you are. And so it made me the type of person that was highly resilient. I learned to work through my dyslexia by figuring out ways to read because I love to learn to read. And so with my kids, and I got in the most amazing shape you can imagine. I used to do 2,000 push-ups in sets of 1 to 200 at a time.
What?
Yeah. I'm not kidding. I'm
That
not.
was
I was an angry young man who felt victimized. And so I was always fighting the victimization of my life. I was
right.
so angry. Like, are you serious? You're going to ground me? It's summertime. I'm on summer vacation. I don't care,
So
son.
so that feeling of victimization, how did translating that to being a father and trying to help your children grow up and navigate and not, feel that way, is that why you gravitated towards strength training and weightlifting?
Yeah, it did something very interesting for me. I was never interested in drugs because I got so high off my workouts, Sari, that I felt so euphoric after 2,000 push-ups that I
Yes.
didn't need to worry about getting into drugs.
No.
And so it was a way that I could get high to combat my anger and my anxiety. Uh, that it was gone. Once I worked out, Sari, all was well in the world for me. And in realizing that, I made sure that my kids exercised. My daughter, Ariel, is an undefeated 7-time national lifting champion,
Oh,
3-time
amazing.
world champion. She should have been a 5-time world champion. I had to withdraw her from the last 2 world championships because she tore her pec. And it was heartbreaking for her and for me because she would have been the first woman to come out of the United States that with a bench shirt would have lifted somewhere close to 350 pounds in a bench press. She
Oof.
was absolutely, she had the highest Wilks score, which is a reflection, a coefficient, a measurement of how strong you are pound for pound. At one time, she had the highest Wilks score of any woman to ever come out of America. When she competed against the Russians, we couldn't figure out why. I think you're allowed, as I recall, I always forget if it's 7 or 8 athletes on the female team street and 7 or 8 athletes on the male team. And suddenly my daughter gets ready to compete at the world championships, and there are 2 Russian women in her division. And everybody's like, why would they put 2 women against Ariel? You only have like 7 women that can get points out of 10 divisions. And then we found out that they did that because they did it as a statement. If Ariel had the highest Wilks score, that meant she was the best female athlete to ever come out of the United States in the world of powerlifting, and they wanted to crush her to make a
Mm.
statement of Russian dominance. It didn't happen, Sarit. It didn't happen at all. She devastated them. It was embarrassing. She beat them so handily. Not only did she beat her, the fight was between her and another young woman who came out of the United States, who was one of the best lifters to ever come out of America. So the real battle wasn't between Russia and the United States. It was between America and America. And my daughter walked off after her last lift, her 9th lift, becoming the next world champion. And it was one of the highlights of my life. I got to coach her in what's called the coaching box. You can't see it on TV, but there's a box that the coach can stand in to give orders to the athlete before they lift and while they're lifting. And it is one of the greatest delights of my life that I got to coach at the world championships. So it would be the equivalent of it's the same federation that was going to eventually go into the Olympics. So that was one of the highlights of my life to be able to do that with my kids. And if I may, Sarit, I'd like to share with you some of the things that I did that really worked for
Yes,
my kid. Is
absolutely.
that okay? So I told you how brilliant and educated my dad was. He did some things that changed my life that I never forgot, Sarit. And I wasn't, as a kid, you don't know really what's going on. Sarit, I just love spending time with my dad. And what he used to do, for example, on Sundays, is he would say, we're going out for a long walk. And it was a long walk, like for miles. And so the whole family would go out on a walk. And unfortunately, you will never be able to meet my mother. You would have adored her. She was just one of the greatest loves of my life. She was so intelligent and so kind and so generous in everything, every aspect of her life. And she would go out, of course, and my father would lead the conversation. And he might say, I want you to question everything in life, son. Another day, Sarit, we'd go out, and I'm not kidding you. This is an actual conversation. Son, I'd like to talk about the brain and how it operates. Oh, I don't know anything about the brain. I know, son. I'm going to teach you about it. And by the time I was done with the walk, I knew all about how the brain worked and how nerve impulses were transmitted and how you could have a muscular contraction that allowed you to walk or talk. And, he could do this in multiple languages. I remember I was 5 years old. I was at a party and I got a little upset. I was looking at my dad and all these people appeared to be laughing at him. And I got angry. I thought, why are they laughing at my daddy? And then I realized they weren't laughing at him. They were laughing at something he was doing. And I got a little closer, Sarit. And I have a very good memory, or I did until I had COVID. I still have a good memory about things that, from early on in my life. And suddenly I heard him reciting what I called poetry. He was actually reciting Macbeth.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that's a strange language. And then someone said to it, Jerry, do it in Japanese. And then he spoke Macbeth in Japanese, and then Hebrew. And he was speaking Macbeth flawlessly in multiple languages. And I pulled him aside and I said, a short time later, before he put me to bed, I said, Daddy, what were you saying? It was so strange. And he said, oh, son, I love Shakespeare. And I was quoting him in a number of languages. And they weren't laughing at me, son. They were laughing at the fact that I could recite Shakespeare, any of the plays that he made, in multiple languages. They just thought that was kind of fun, kind of cool. Oh, okay. So he was amazing in that way. He was the kind of man that set an example by how he lived. And so one of the things that I always did the very best I could was to do the same with my kids. And so I learned from him the power of having walks, the power of family being together, the power of conversing, Sarit, about anything.
Yes.
My mother and father used to say to me, we would much rather have you ask us than your friends, who might or might not have any idea what they're talking about at your age. And so my dad, being a PhD and very, very educated, he was a guy, Sarit, like I said, I've never known anybody like him. You could say to him, Jerry, recite Walt Whitman. Jerry, recite this passage out of the Bible. Jerry, recite this passage from Goethe. And he could do it like this. 2.5 weeks before he died, he gave me 22 minutes of Macbeth, perfectly executed, not a mistake. 50 or 60 years after he learned it. That's the kind of man he was. He was the kind of man who used to say to me, son, even if I don't have the answer, please come to me. Come to me and talk to me, and we'll sort things out. And so I did that with my kids. I've always said to my kids, I don't care what it is. I don't care what it is. Come to me. We will talk about anything and everything. And I remember not long ago, my daughter was at our house, and her girlfriends overheard a conversation she was having with probably her mother, Susan, my wife. And when she came back, the girls were mortified. They said, you just had that conversation with your mother? And she said, yes. Why? And they said, I wouldn't be caught dead having that conversation with my mother. I said, well, how do you feel about that? What do you mean, how do I feel? I would feel horribly embarrassed. And they said, well, here's the thing. My mom and dad said to me when I was a little girl, if I ever had anything I wanted to talk about that I didn't understand, to come to them first. And so I always do, because they can speak to me without being critical or being judgmental, and give me an educated opinion that actually moves my life forward. Who do you do that with? Right. You, Sophie, we do it with you. Okay, great. I'm glad you have someone to do that with. So that was another thing that I did with my kids. I want to share something very special, Sarit, if I may, about one of the biggest things that made a difference in the life of me and my children.
Absolutely.
My father was so there for me. I know in some ways he was disappointed because he didn't have a job that made the kind of money ultimately that he wanted to help me financially. And that has never, ever occurred as an issue in my life, because what he gave me was his love and his brilliance. He taught me how to be effective and successful as a man, as a husband, as a father in the world. And there was nothing more that he could have ever given me. He taught me how to make my own money. And I tried to tell him that near the end of his life. I said, Dad, don't ever apologize to me. You were the greatest example of a father that I could have ever had. And Mom was the perfect mother for me. Perfect. I could have never had anyone more perfectly fitted to be my parents than you two. And they both thanked me for that, as you can imagine. So what I did with my kids when they were very little, Sarit, and this was one of the game changers in my life as a parent, I said to each of my children separately, where we could be alone, we could really talk about this, and they were little kids, very, very little kids. I said, you know, there will come a time where we'll be upset with each other. There may come a time where we're really upset with each other. How are you going to know that no matter how upset we get with each other, that I love you more than anything in the world? I don't know, Daddy. I might be too angry to remember anything. And I said, that's why we're having this conversation when you're not angry, because I want you to train your mind and your heart to know no matter how upset we ever get at each other, that we are family. We will always be family, and love will always rule our hearts and our minds. We will not live by hatred. We will not live by resentment. You understand me? I think so, Daddy. I don't know exactly what that means. I said, okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you would know that I love you. What kinds of things might I do or express to you that would let you know that you're loved? Well, Daddy, my artwork is very, very important to me. So I would really want you to come to see my art projects. Okay. Okay. Got it. And I'd like you to go to the PTA meetings, Daddy. That's very important. That's where they educate all the parents. Okay. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, PTA, great. But okay. So they listed all these things. And 4 or 5 years ago, Sarit, my daughters were together and they looked at me and they said, Daddy, how did you come to all our elementary and junior high school events? I said, well, do you remember when you were little girls? And I asked you how you'd know if I love you? Oh my God. And we said, come to all of our art. Oh my God. You closed your practice to come see our first grade art projects? I said, yes, I did. Are you serious? No wonder you were the only dad there. I said, well, honey, don't be hard on the other dads. Most people work for other people. I own my own practice with your mother. And so when you said it was very important to go to your school to see your artwork, I took you very seriously. I wanted you to know you could trust me. I wanted you to know how much I loved you, so that when the time came where there was discord between us, that you would never forget how much I love and adore you. So, Sarit, the date is June 12th of last year, 2020, and I'm sitting at the table, the head of the table, and we're celebrating my daughter and her beautiful husband, Landy. They're two of the most lovely people I know. We're celebrating their wedding at their dinner. And as I mentioned to you, and I didn't finish this thought, but I will now, they said to me, or my daughter specifically said, Daddy, you were really hard on us growing up. And I said, okay, I can hear that. I said, may I ask all of you a question? And so I have my two daughters, my son, and my new son-in-law, and a number of friends of the son-in-law, and my son's lovely, lovely girlfriend, who I hope marries her. Reese, if you watch this, she's lovely. Crazy about her. So is my wife. I said this. I said, tell me this, all of you. How did your lives turn out? And my son burst out laughing and he said, touche. I said, I know I was hard on you. I get it. I said, life's harder. Life's harder than I will ever be on you. You'll go through things in your life that you never will have ever even thought would happen. Last year, we had unprecedented fires in California. We had unprecedented hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. We had a pandemic. We had a craziness with an election process. And yet my kids all thrived. They all thrived. My son graduated from medical school. He won 2 out of 3 of the most prestigious awards that they offer. He got into Ivy League. He was offered acceptance into Ivy League schools in medicine. My daughter just won for the 3rd year in a row, Research Assistant of the Year. My younger daughter won the Student of the Year award in the J. Mac Robinson School of Business at the University of, Georgia State, and just got a job that is so unbelievable. It's like Susan, my wife, and I are still kicking back and going, she got that just out of college. And she just said, she's our daughter, sweetie. She'll be president of the world in 10 years. And so my point is, yes, I was very firm. I'm sure they were upset with me, probably more often than I want to know, Sarit. But I think when kids are young, it's much more important to be their mentor and a figure that teaches through action integrity, honor, that
Absolutely.
teaches the importance of discipline, goal setting, doing your homework consistently every day, because that's a reflection of what life will be like when you're in the world working. And so we were very strict on them, not crazy strict. They still got to do a lot of things, a lot of time on technology. They did chores, and there were no, like, you made your bed in the Bulmash house, and there was no if, ands, or buts. You woke up, you peed, and you went back in your room to make your bed, because order is important, because discipline is important, because creating an atmosphere or an ambiance or a home that is livable for all is important.
Yes, it is. It sure is. This was such an inspirational, informational, and motivational, conversation. I'm really, really impressed with you, with the father person that you are, with your father. I am honored that this is part of my family. We're for our listeners that don't
Yes,
know, we're
your
actually
family.
related, but we didn't know it until we, met on Facebook. We haven't met
Yeah.
in person, but thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me, to share your beautiful stories. And I really want to meet your children, my cousins,
Yes,
and I look
you will
forward
love
to
them.
continuing the conversations for years to come.
Thank you, Sarit. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelson.